Welcome back to Screen View Mirror. I'm your host, Emma, and you're listening to Screen View Thoughts. Today on the podcast, we'll be talking about filmmaking and directing more in particular, and I'm very happy to have Popcorn Philosophy back on the channel. Popcorn Philosophy, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good, pretty good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Okay, so what sparked your interest in film, and is there a moment in which you thought that what you want to do is to direct movies?
That's actually a question I get a lot. As a film major, it's always like, when did you know you wanted to go into film, or why are you into film? Early on, when I was, much younger, maybe 10, 9, 11, whatever, me and my father would always go to the theater and watch movies, and that was sort of like a very consistent pastime that we'd always do. And so I knew from the start that I loved film and I loved watching movies. But I guess looking at it more as like a career and a artistic outlet didn't really come to me, or wasn't really something that passed my mind until I was in high school. And I started was watching YouTube videos about filmmaking, and it was just more like demystifying, because to me film was sort of untouchable. It was something I could admire but not really partake in. And then it started kind of slowly developing into something I was working on, whether it be through just like stupid like class video projects, like Spanish video projects about like cooking. And it kind of would slowly grow more into more. Than I was doing like historical epics with my friends wearing like fabric we bought. Like it was slowly developing more and more. And then I kind of just, something clicked and I realized that there wasn't really anything else I wanted to do. There was nothing else I could even think about doing. I didn't have any other majors that came to mind. And I knew like everyone in film school wants to write and direct. That's kind of just like the reality of the situation. But I kind of wanted to write first, and then after writing a bit, I kind of wanted to try directing, and it kind of just sort of spiraled from there.
Tell me about the films you've directed so far and the experiences you've had on set. And for those of you who have had the chance to see Popcorn Philosophy's latest short, if you want to talk more about Rubbers, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So coming into film school, I had done some small shorts with friends, mainly class projects, nothing really super substantial. And I can only really speak about my film school, but it's very much, you put in the work and then you can kind of start moving up from there. So I started working on a lot of sets, very small roles. I do script supervising. I would work as a grip. I PA'd once or twice. It was very, kind of bottom of the totem pole. Making connections, learning what it's like to work on a film set that's an actual film set. But yeah, and then obviously there was classes where you got to sort of do your own film. So fresh, maybe sophomore year, I did like a quick, small little short film with a friend of mine, about like a guy eating cake. It wasn't anything crazy. And then last semester I did, I think, about 3 short films. 2 of them are really micro, small things, just like either exercises or like lighting practice stuff. And then the short that I made last semester was called Strand, which was sort of like a absurd horror mix about a bald man that finds a hair in his apartment and kind of goes crazy and sees like a hair monster. It was a bit of a weird little movie, but it was kind of fun to make. Yeah, and then this semester I directed and wrote Rubbers, which for those that haven't seen it or don't know what that is, it's essentially a short film about a kind of like a shy, awkward teenager who's going into a corner store to buy condoms. He's really religious, and then his like pastor walks in, and he has like a personal like surreal crisis / like nightmare about it all. But yeah, so that's sort of my experience. It was very much like kind of working my way up, not even like for networking and connections, more of just confidence and making sure that I was confident on set, knew enough about equipment that I could like really try to refine what I'm looking for visually, and also just making sure I was able to really collaborate with everyone around me, because you have to know the lingo, you have to know the equipment, you have to know what's possible.
Right.
You have to know what to write, what to plan. You have to be very practical with everything that you do, because if you make something impossible and then you make it, it's probably not going to be the best,
Yeah. So, in terms of your experience on set in general, would you say that there's such a thing as the typical day on set? Because for those of us who aren't kind of like part of the whole filmmaking world, what's it like?
Yeah,
on
that's a great
set?
question. Yeah, it's very much circumstantial. I mean, I would
Hmm.
say 100% every set is different. Maybe like every like if it's like 2 days on one set, they may be similar, but usually every set is different. There's always a different collection of people. There's different circumstances. One day you may have to spend like 3 hours putting trash bags on a window because they want it to look like it's nighttime. Another day you may be running around on a BMX track at 4 a.m. holding cords. Like it's always very circumstantial. It's always very very different. And usually, even if it's boring, it's kind of fun because you still get to talk with people and hear about experiences. And but yeah, it's definitely like there's not really like a template to what set will be like. It's very much always changing, always fluid.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting because I think that as an outsider, you'd think of a set as this super exciting kind of Hollywood experience, but sometimes it can just be very, very boring. It's not as exciting as you might imagine, and you're not going to see like cars flying out and into the air because there's an action scene or whatever. Like, I think that 99% of it is a lot of kind of structured activity in my view, but then again, I've never been on a set. But would you say that that's accurate? Or
Yeah, so it's kind of different because again, my experience is almost is purely student films.
right.
And so some of them are frankly they ran pretty terribly, and so there's always a lot of hectic. But yeah, usually it's structured in the sense that you get a call sheet in the morning, you have a role. The role is usually pretty self-explanatory. There's usually not a lot of like. Again, it depends on the role you're doing too. Because if you're a DP, then you're going to be busy the entire time. But if you're a PA, you may just be your only role may just be watching equipment for 12 hours. So
Right, right.
it's very dependent on the set you're on and the role that you have. But yeah, it can be really boring times. I mean, and it also depends on how it's scheduled and organized. I know one set that was running this semester. I think it ended up going for 22 hours,
Oh wow.
which isn't that's like really terrible. But a lot of the issue was just scheduling, and people were just sitting around for like 12 hours not doing anything. So it's also very dependent on how it's scheduled, how it's organized, and all that stuff.
Right. So, moral of the story, your experience on set is defined by obviously the type of film, the people you're working with, and what, the level of organization and scheduling that everyone has. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So before we go more in depth with rubbers, I wanted to ask you a question that actually popped into my mind a couple days ago, which is when filmmakers sort of start out, I feel like, or at least in my experience, most of the shorts that I've seen from people who kind of just started making films were in the realm of absurdity. And it's interesting, like, if we take absurd as a genre, would you say that it's a genre that a lot of film students kind of start out in? And I think I saw an Instagram story, I'm not sure whose it was, but it said something along the lines of those who start out in film kind of go for absurd like shorts and whatnot because they can't tell a story apparently, I quote, which isn't necessarily the case, but it also raises the question of like, okay, how would we define the word story, and can we really say that the purpose of film is to tell a story, or if the purpose could be not having a purpose in itself? But so two questions. A, have you sort of noticed that a lot of filmmakers who start out in the absurd genre? And B, would you say that we can still tell a story even if there's no kind of linear purpose or kind of like definitive meaning?
Yeah,
I
really
realize that
great.
was very
So
confusing. Sorry.
no, I got what you were saying.
Okay.
So for the first question, I think yes, and I think you can see that in my work as well. And I think working in absurdism is easier to start actually because you can really be super expressive and over exaggerate visuals and dialogue. And you can kind of get away with it a little bit because you're kind of working and operating under the umbrella of absurdism. I don't think that's a negative thing necessarily. In fact, I think it's actually really helpful for people starting out because again, they
Yeah.
can really get their bearings and really kind of play around with the medium and not have to feel limited by like realism or about like practicality or a sense of belief. Like they can really just work on telling a story and really like using film to kind of like to further perpetuate what they're trying to say and do it in a really creative and unique way. But yeah, I would say a lot of the films, maybe not maybe not this semester, but usually a lot of the earlier films I see are usually either like dreamy films or they're kind of just working with a really exaggerated sense of realism that I think is maybe I wouldn't say it's negative, but it definitely is telling that like I think it's easier to start off in that realm and then work your way to it. But another thing I don't think filmmakers, especially beginner filmmakers, realize is like there's always going to be a gap between the films that you love and the films that you make. And the only way to sort of shorten that gap is through practice and experience. So for me personally, I'd rather work on a film that I'm 100% like knowledgeable of and able to control and then get experience from and work my way up to sort of those highbrow, like hyper realistic films. And I think that people just start when they try to start off and try to just do super realistic, highbrow, philosophical films that often always fail. It's because they haven't tried to just master the basics, which I do think is sort of falling back into the absurdism realm. As for the second question about like its linearity and storytelling, I think
Or
you can
not
make a story.
linearity necessarily, but clarity and realism.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, I think like a story can be derived out of anything. I mean, I think like if you're referring to sort of absurdism more in the sense that it's like films that are super experimental, there's no clear narrative. I don't know. To me, I think narrative and story is always like you can always derive that from something. And I think
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
would, and I would even like to me like the way that I differentiate like good student films that do that and bad is more about like atmosphere and techniques. I guess it's less about story, but I don't really think all films have to be also like completely story driven. I think they can be like very much atmospheric and very much like about making you feel certain feelings. And so I think sort of suggesting that like they're lesser or because there's not a super concise story that they're not as powerful or impactful is certainly not giving them the credit they deserve.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think like if we ask the question of can a film have a purpose if it doesn't have a story, which is really what my messy monologue came down to. I think it absolutely can. And I think that sometimes there is purpose in purposelessness, or at least meaning in purposelessness, or what seems to be purposelessness, which kind of goes to the idea of interpretation and subjectivity and what the film means to you. So you don't necessarily need to tell a story, let alone a linear story, I think, and I think you'd agree with me, to have a kind of well crafted film, and especially to explore your possibilities and your capacities as a filmmaker. And I do think that absurdism kind of gives at least filmmakers starting out a platform or like a space to really express themselves and explore what they want to do and how they want to show it.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I think it's about expression, and that's sort of what I think it all comes down to.
Yeah. Okay, so back to rubbers. What sparked your idea for that?
It's actually like two separate stories. So, I made rubbers for my advanced narrative class, and basically how that works is you pitch a script, and then like the top few get chosen. So I was struggling to sort of come up with an idea, and I thought about this time in high school where my very very Catholic friend wanted to go buy condoms at a Walgreens. I think it was either Walgreens or CVS, and he wanted me to like go there with him and watch the door to make sure no one he knew like arrived. So that was sort of like the very first like idea where that like sort of concept came to me. And then while I was still brainstorming and thinking about the script more, another friend of mine told me about how when he was purchasing condoms, I think either the cashier, I think it was a cashier, they kind of like gave him a look or thumbs up or something to that effect. And it was like really weird to me. Like I've worked in sort of the cashier market or the cashier industry or whatever, and I see people purchasing condoms, and I just never say anything, even look at them. So I thought it was funny that like they kind of broke that unspoken rule and like acknowledged it. And so I was just really interested in that whole taboo of purchasing condoms and what that means, and I really wanted to give it like the religious spin. Just I thought that would add some more to it.
Okay, that's interesting. And I saw the short and I absolutely loved it. I loved the references to other films. I loved the colors, the whole thing. It was great. And what I could notice from those, what, it was about 10 minutes, right? If I remember correctly.
I think the end was about 13, but it was more like 12 minutes and like a minute of credits.
Right. So, from what I could tell while watching it, and I watched it 2 or 3 times, every single second was crafted so meticulously. And I could tell it was almost as if you invested a week into each frame. Whether that was actually the case or not, you can tell me in a second, but it blew my mind how every single frame was in place and well thought out, and the film references and the framing and the script, like the whole thing was just so good. And so walk me through pre-production. How did you kind of go about planning the whole thing?
Yeah, like normally when you hear about film sets, they always say like hell was production. It was the filming. And our production was there. It wasn't obviously there was always the issues, the things we had to figure out. But for me, pre-production was the hell. So first off, the script itself it changed drastically. I think I wrote and rewrote it. I think we finally filmed the 11th draft. First two drafts were pretty bad. I actually reread them a few days ago, and they were really bad. It made me kind of cringe. But yeah, I just basically on the script end of things, my sort of method is just write the script and then rewrite it and then rewrite it again, and slowly kind of just uncover ways to sort of complicate things. So the religious aspect of it, I didn't even really think of that until around draft 4 or 5.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, I mean that was like a pretty big like, oh yeah, this is like much better. Because originally it was just like random scenarios happening, and it didn't. It was just kind of it felt like a really shitty SNL skit. So then I kind of kept playing with it more. The whole like father, like he was like with Father Simon's daughter. That was like literally draft 9 or 10. So like,
Wow.
it's really about yeah, it's it's about like finding ideas and just sort of rolling with them. Also,
Right.
I'm sort of lucky enough that I have like a solid network of people that I can send it to, get feedback from. I think maybe there's like 2 people that read every single draft of the script from the terrible one to the passable one. So they were always giving me notes, and I also had a professor that was giving me notes, and so it was just constantly trying to rewrite it, try to trim it down because I think the first draft was like 15 or 16 pages, and I was just trying to really refine it, and make sure that like things were funny, but also I wanted them to have meaning and be somewhat, I don't know, somewhat like not just empty words, which I was definitely struggling to do. And all, cause I think the biggest issue earlier on was I was trying really, really hard just to be funny, and it was not landing. And when I wrote it a little bit more seriously, I think is when it actually became funny, and that's sort of what I learned in the writing phase. For the like actual like logistics of crew, cast, equipment, location, that was not, I wouldn't say it was a mess, but location was definitely the hardest part of the whole process for me. I was just trying to find a corner store gas station, and the hardest part about it is, we needed it for 3 nights, and it had to be overnight shooting, so we had to get someone to agree to let us there
Right.
overnight. So I started off asking CVS and Walgreens right off the bat, and they were both pretty quick to say no. Then I asked a few pharmacies that were close to me. I asked some grocery stores. I asked, and they all said no. Then I started asking gas stations, and when they say no, it's like a week or two of correspondence until they say no. So I'm kind of hoping they'll say yes, and they say no. Then I gotta look somewhere else. I think about a week. I think it was like it got to the point where I was filming like I filmed March 25th to 27th. Those were the 3 days. And I think I was still looking at spring breaks like a week before. And what I would do is I was working on another set as assistant director. And so every time that set ended, I would just drive around to a random part of the city and go to every single gas station and corner store and ask the cashier if I could talk to the manager and film there.
Wow.
Um, I think the whole list of people I asked got to around 40 people, 40 like establishments that I went into in person.
That is a long
Um,
list.
it was a long list, and it was like it taught me a lot about like communicative skills and like talking with people and really like trying to sell yourself though, because it was very stressful at first to like go into stores and talk to people, and you're not being like confrontational, but you're being very like forward about it, and you have to like be able to have confidence to say it like while other customers are there waiting behind you. So it's like
Yeah,
tough,
yeah.
but then by like store 38, it was just like a routine almost. I would just go there
Hello,
and ask
excuse
and then
me, I'm
leave.
here for a
Yeah.
movie.
It was like, hey, can I film a short film about condoms? No. All right, have a good day, and that was it. So,
Like, get out of my
but
office. I need this
yeah.
place overnight.
Well,
Okay.
well, I mean, honestly, the hardest hurdle actually was a language barrier with almost every place, because I was first I started off by just trying to call them, and it was either the phones were bad or they couldn't understand what I was saying. Not even because of language, but also I tend to talk really fast,
Mm.
and especially when I'm nervous. So that was the first hurdle. So then I went in person. Anyways, the place we ended up finding was one of the very first places that someone recommended to me. But when I first went there, they said that the owner wasn't going to be there until after spring break. So I took that as I can't really get a yes or no until after spring break, which was
Mm.
like the week of my shooting. So it would be like a 5-day turnaround. So
Right.
I kind of put that as my Hail Mary. If I didn't find anything by then, I'll go ask. But randomly during spring break again, I figured I'd just go ask them again to see if there was another employee there. Then I went there and I asked the guys. He was like, "Yeah, I'll be there all 3 nights." I had to pay them some money, which was actually a lot more money than I was anticipating. But paid them the money, and they stayed overnight with us, and that they were super helpful, super easy. So that worked out really well. So that was the location. Again, that was like the part that was stressing me out the most. That was the part that I was like ripping my hair out over. Um, sorry. So getting crew together was really easy. I've worked on a lot of sets, and I feel like I have a lot of friends in different departments, and so it was relatively easy getting crew together. I would say there's only maybe 2 or 3 people on set that I didn't know very well, but I would like after working with them, it was like really great, and I would work with them again. So that all went really well. Casting was also pretty easy for me because the main actor Evan, who played Matt, he was a friend of mine. We've worked on sets before. He was in one of my other shorts last semester, and I wrote this script for him and mine.
Oh,
I told
nice.
him about the script, wrote it, sent it to him. He was super down, and that was really really easy. Like he did the role perfectly in my opinion because I wrote it for him. Um, Father Simon's actor, his name was Joe. I worked with him on a set last summer. I was a grip. He was the lead actor. We never talked or said anything. And while I was writing the script, I just kept seeing him as this priest. So I just DM'd him on Instagram, asked him to apply or asked him to audition. He's like, sure. And then it was pretty easy to cast him because I like literally envisioned him as that role.
Right.
And then Stephanie, who played the mom, she was one of the only. She was actually we only had 2 people audition for the mom. We had like 40 people auditioned for Father Simon, and we had in case Evan wasn't available, I put the casting call out for Matt. We got like 50 people for Matt, but we had only had 2 people for the mom. And Stephanie was great. Like immediately, she like knew what she was doing. I think she cried in the audition, which I was like, "This is perfect." And then for Satan, that was the voice actor. They were really great. Their name is JB Webb, and they were amazing. They were really trying different things. They were really going with the role of Satan really well, and they were super really really good with communicating. So that was all super easy. Yeah, and then equipment was I let my DP Anna handle that. She did a great job. She kind of figured all the lights and everything they needed for that, so that wasn't really too big of an issue. Yeah, and then finally, just for the shot composition, the shot list, all that stuff. So I made the shot list, and I was just trying to think of the best visual way to sort of communicate everything. And I was watching some films, trying to get some ideas. But what really helped us and what made us so effective and efficient on set was we went to the location like maybe 3 days before shooting.
Mm.
And what we did, and I haven't seen other crew people do this, and I think this is like
That's a
super
really
brilliant.
good tip. Yeah.
Yeah, this was what was. Well, we went to the location, and then so I stood in as Matt. My gaffer Colin stood in as Father Simon, and then my AD Whitney stood in as Matt's mom. And we took pictures of every single shot that we wanted. So we started with the wide and the outside, then we took a picture of me in the car, took a picture of me looking at like a box. Like we did all these shots, and so that's also how we did our storyboard because we took all these like pictures that we took of the shots that we wanted, put them into a presentation. So on set, we'd say, okay, 4A is next. And then me and Anna would look at the picture we took for 4A and we would just shoot it. And it was like, it gave us a lot of time to kind of like brainstorm and collaborate, like while we're not on set, like while we're off set. So then when we're on set, we know what we need to get, and there's not much issues with that. And it
Right.
also helped us a lot because me and Anna, we both had assistant directed thesis shorts over spring break, and so we were both really stressed out about having enough time for shots. And so I had originally planned for us to do 80 shots over 3 days, which I think maybe 90, which is insane. That's like 30 days is unbelievably impossible. And so I was really stressed out about that. But me and Anna, we went over the storyboard pictures we took, and it made it really easy for us to eliminate duplicate shots that we wouldn't need. And so it made everything super easy. We were able to cut it down to, I think we ended up only like having about 50 shots or maybe 45. We were doing like 15 a day, which is super manageable. And I didn't really feel like we cut anything that I was like desperate for. I think we got literally everything I wanted. So I was really happy with all that.
And you can definitely see the level of detail when watching the short. Every single angle of the camera, word in the script, color of the lighting and everything, that was very well thought out. And going to the location before shooting is a very good piece of advice. So, yeah, thank you for that. And one of the questions that we actually received from the Instagram, what was it, question like poll thing that you did to ask people to send questions. Yeah, one of them was about the storyboard, so I'm glad you covered that. And another question was if you could go back and do the whole thing all over again, what would you change? Would you change anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like it's tough to answer. I think if there's issues with the final product, I don't think there's much technical. There's the color grading issues, which were my fault because we were up super late color grading it, but we're gonna fix that. So that's the easy fix. Um, Honestly, I think if there's issues, it's much more conceptual issues and less technical issues. Our sound was solid. I think our shots were good. I'm not too sure. I guess there was like one or two extra shots we did have to cut that would have been cooler, but I'm pretty happy with the end result. There's like super micro small things in the final product that I'm not like super thrilled with, but they're not terrible.
Final question about rubbers before we sort of move on to a couple other questions related to directing. Which process takes more time, shooting or editing? And this is also from the Instagram thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, shooting took 3 days, editing took like 3 weeks.
Right.
So I mean, editing for sure, but if you
It,
want to count pre-production to shooting, then that's sort of different. I think.
yeah, like
I mean,
sorry to
yeah,
interrupt you, but I was gonna say like the whole finding the location and everything. If you could call that part of shooting, I guess it
yeah. I
would
mean,
take longer.
to
Yeah.
give, I can give more specific like time period. So I think the first draft of the script was finished like January 19th or 20th. And then we shot March 25th to 27th, and then I think our first edit was done like a week, or I think our assembly cut was done a week after that, and then our second cut was 2 weeks after that, and then our final cut was turned in and done May 10th or 11th.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
about I would say a month and a half of editing, probably about a month and a half of pre-production. Wait, yeah, and then 3 days of shooting.
Yeah. But it's like shooting and well, editing kind of starts as you shoot and then obviously shooting
Yeah.
starts as you plan the whole thing. So it's very much interwoven, I guess.
Yeah, and that's something actually my DP was asking me about. It's like make sure that like obviously, but make sure that like when you're filming shots and when you're directing and when you're thinking about everything, that you're also editing as well mentally
Yeah.
because you want to make
Yeah.
sure things flow together, things connect. If there's something you miss, you need to get a shot to like link things together. And we were really
Exactly.
lucky actually in the here's a specific example actually in the final cut. There was a small section that we cut because it was just a little long and not super interesting. And we were lucky enough that we got an insert of him picking up the condoms. This is like in the aisle. He picks up the condoms, and that was a shot that it was able we were able to get last second, and it was actually a really big help because it helped us cut like a minute off the film.
Right.
Um, so it's about like just getting if you can get an insert that you think may help you kind of cut things out or help you link things together. Always go for it if you have time because they can really help you in the editing room.
All right. And in terms of references, what's your favorite reference that you made
Oh,
to
by
other
far the
movies?
Citizen Kane one. Yeah, that was like there was question like we were cutting shots, and I told my DP like the one shot I will absolutely not cut is the close up of the mouth.
Okay,
Like
nice.
the
Rosebud.
rosebud shot
Yeah.
was very important to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's pretty much it regarding rubbers. So, as I take it, you're in film school, and my question to you is, what would you say is the main purpose of film school, and how valuable is your film school experience for your work as a director so far?
Yeah. So film school degree, I think everyone knows this. It means pretty much nothing. I mean, no one in the industry is going to care you went to film school, but film school is invaluable in two ways. One, because it's networking, it's connections. If
Mm,
you, a lot of people at UT, for example, at the school I go to, University of Texas, a lot of film students will end up moving to LA. And so if I were to move to LA right now, I could have connections, and I could probably get some level of small work just because I recognize people that I worked with on sets in college, and so that's a really necessary thing to think about with film school. And then I guess the second really important thing about film school is the resources you get. So
right.
with my film rubbers, all the equipment that we used was free. It cost me $0 for all the equipment. We just rented it from my like equipment checkout place here at my university. And then also like through that you get to actually like have a body of work that you can like shop around and show people just to kind of prove that at the very least you kind of know what to do or how to work, and
Yeah.
that's really important.
Imagine that you have an unlimited budget to direct a movie and you get to choose anyone. I mean, living or dead, you name it, for your cast, DP, producer, etc., and you have a very flexible time frame. Basically, there are no limitations on the resources and the time, the creativity and everything that you can have for your film. The one limitation is that this is going to be your last film. And I know that you're just starting out, so it's kind of a daunting question to ask you. But if someone just came up to you and said, listen, you can have anyone in the industry, you can have any budget you want, but this is going to be your last film, give me your elevator pitch.
God, I have no idea. Oh shit. I think here's just the very first one that comes to mind
Okay.
is I'm. This is like a random one that I have thought zero about, but I'll give something. In high school, I was really interested in the Fourth Crusade.
Okay.
It's a really bizarre story because they ended up like just sacking like a Christian. They ended up sacking Constantinople instead of like um, the Holy Lands, and there's a lot of really interesting characters. There's like a 90-year-old blind like Venetian leader. There's like a bunch of betrayal, and it'd be a really interesting like fun story to tell. I think with an unlimited budget, if I can get like a bunch of big cast, it would be
Right.
it'd be like a big Game of Thrones film type
Or
of
like
aspect.
Monty Python meets Spartacus or something like
Yeah, yeah,
that.
and so that'd be really fun for me. And I think like again, the history is really fascinating.
Right.
So that'd be I guess my last film.
Nice, nice. Well, I can't wait to watch that.
Oh God,
But I I hope it won't be your last film, and I certainly hope it won't be your first film. Not that I think it would be bad, but if that would be
yeah,
your
okay.
last film and then your first film, it would mean that it would only be like the next movie that you. Anyway, you get my point. Okay,
Thank you.
next question. All right, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to yourself 3 years ago in relation to filmmaking and film school? What's something that you wish you knew then that you know now?
I would definitely just tell myself to push myself. I was always very timid and shy. My freshman year of college, I was nervous to work on film sets. I was nervous to talk to people. I was afraid that it was like an imposter syndrome situation. So I never really actively sought out sets. I was kind of just in my room making Instagram memes, which it benefited me in the long run, but I don't think it was
Mm,
great for my development early on. And so they didn't really I didn't really start actively pursuing stuff and working on stuff until sophomore year, second semester. Um, and I always wonder where you would have been if you'd started earlier. So I would have just told myself to really put myself out there, and if you make mistakes or fail, it's fine, but people aren't really going to remember that too much, and you can always improve. So that probably be my only main suggestion would just be to really push myself and get out of my dorm room and stop watching Seventh Seal and shit like that.
Okay, all right. Well, that makes sense. But at the same time, I feel like your experience, and when I say your, I don't mean you in particular, but in general, people's experiences so far kind of like shape them to become who they are today. So no one knows how popcorn philosophy would be today if, let's say, 3 years ago, he'd have started, I don't know, pushing himself more earlier. You know what I mean?
I don't think my meme page would exist if I did that, and so
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like your meme page brought you all this great stuff, so at the same time there's that to consider.
true, true.
Yeah. But anyway, counterfactuals. Okay, last question. In one word, what makes a great director?
Flexibility. I think that the biggest aspect about filmmaking and what makes a good director is problem solving on the spot. And so we didn't have a lot of issues pop up on production, but there were certainly issues that we had to sort of figure out and work with. And I think when directors are stubborn and they're unable to collaborate and work with other people, it makes a really shitty film. And I want to make films that aren't just me, but they're everyone on the crew with me. And so I think sort of being flexible and being willing to sort of shape the film according to the circumstance and still make it solid and good and memorable and noteworthy is really, really crucial. And especially with actors as well. If a line isn't working, if there's some kind of really clunky stuff going on, letting the actors kind of work it with you or work it by themselves, I think is really crucial to having a fluid film that flows well and isn't just you messing up by yourself. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Popcorn Philosophy, as always, it was a pleasure to have you on Screenview Mirror. This was Screenview Thoughts.